Hello everyone, welcome to DSC 10. My name's Dr. Justin Eldridge, but you can just call me Justin. So if this is your first quarter here at UCSD, welcome. If it's your first quarter as a data science major, welcome. And to everyone else, welcome. So what is DSC 10? What are we going to be doing this quarter? Well, DSC 10 is a crash course in data science. We are going to learn the actual tools and techniques used by data scientists in their day-to-day work. So at the end of this quarter, you can go off, take what you learned in this quarter, and do some data science. DSC 10 is based on a course called Data 8 from Berkeley. We've taken it, we've made some changes and some improvements. In fact, this quarter, we're writing a new textbook for DSC 10 that aligns more with our curriculum here at UCSD. So DSC 10 is a crash course in data science, or a guided tour, if you will. It's kind of split into two parts. In the first half of the quarter, we're going to focus on programming and doing data analysis in Python. If you don't know any Python, if you've never programmed a line of code, that's fine. We're going to start from square one. We're going to learn a little bit of Python. We're going to learn a little bit of a Python tool called Pandas that is used by actual data scientists to do their data analysis. About halfway through the quarter, we're going to switch gears and we will talk about statistics. But we're not going to use math to talk about statistics. You might have taken a statistics class before in high school, for instance, and learned all about t-tests and things like that. We're going to cover the same basic ideas, but from a different angle, from a computational angle. So we're not going to do any math. We're going to run some simulations. We're going to run code to compute probabilities. The cool thing about this is it allows us to use statistical techniques that are kind of advanced in some sense. They're not necessarily super complicated, but they're kind of like on the cutting edge, things like the bootstrap. So we'll see that in the second half of the quarter. So in a normal quarter, in a live lecture, I could ask this question and see sort of the distribution of results in terms of how much programming experience do people in DSC 10 actually have. Of course, I can't do that here in a pre-recorded lecture, but I can tell you what I would normally get. And what I would normally get is like one or two people saying that yes, they're a Java or a Python pro, or at least they think they are. But the majority of the class is kind of evenly distributed between I have some experience, I have a little bit of basic experience, and I have no experience whatsoever. Hopefully coming into this class, you have some idea that programming will be required in data science, but if not, I guess that's okay because we're going to start from basically square one. Now, if you're coming into this class and you have a ton of programming experience, you still might find the first few weeks interesting. And that's because we're not just going to talk about programming. We're not really going to call this a programming course. We're going to learn about how to do data analysis in Python. So we're going to be learning Pandas, a Python package called Pandas. So that still may be new to you. Still, if you've heard of Pandas, if you've used it before, and you're bored in the first half of the quarter, you probably won't be bored in the second half of the quarter when we move to statistics. Oftentimes, the people who breeze through the programming might have trouble with the statistics and vice versa. Okay, so what is data science anyways? Well, we've prepared a simple demo here to kind of demonstrate what data science is. Now, data science kind of has a vague or all-encompassing definition, which is it's about drawing useful conclusions from data in a principled way. I like this definition because, I mean, it's just vague enough to not really mean too much, but it gives you an idea of what we're trying to do as data scientists. There are various tasks or various aims of data science. One of them is exploration. That is, you give me a data set that I know nothing about, and I explore it in search of interesting patterns. One of the tools that I use in exploration is visualization. So I might plot the data and see if there are any patterns. Another thing we do in data science is we make predictions or informed guesses. I try to predict the future. I try to predict based on your GPA what your salary will be as a data scientist. This is a part of data science that has a lot to do with machine learning. people ask me, what's the difference or what's the relationship between machine learning and data science? I often say machine learning is data science. It's part of data science. There's also inference. Inference is about determining whether or not the patterns that we see are reliable or whether they're just due to random noise. We're going to talk about inference, prediction, and exploration all throughout this quarter. So I said we've prepared a demo that kind of shows you the power of data science. And so let's go to the demo. In fact, you can follow along with the demo yourself by going to dsc10.com. So if you go to dsc10.com, you'll see something like this. And all of the course materials will be posted here in the schedule. They'll show up once they're released. And so you can click here to find the lecture slides. That's what I was going through just before. But there's also a lecture notebook. So if you click this, it's going to take you to Data Hub. Data Hub is a site run by UCSD that runs what are called Jupyter Notebooks. And you'll get really familiar with Jupyter Notebooks throughout the rest of the quarter. This is how you will be doing your assignments. I'll talk a little bit more about those in a second. It's also how lectures will be given through Jupyter Notebooks. So here is a Jupyter Notebook. It's basically a way of presenting and writing code and running code in the browser. So this is a Python Jupyter Notebook. We can write Python code in here and run it. And the cool thing is you don't have to have any of this installed on your computer. This is going to run on UCSD's servers. Okay, so you don't have to install Python. You don't have to worry about any of that. It's going to run on somebody else's machine. So let's take a look at what we're doing here in this notebook. So we'll zoom in here so you can see better. So I can run some code. I'm just going to run this first cell. Don't worry too much about what's going on yet. We'll learn a little bit more about how to work with Jupyter Notebooks in the next lecture. But I want to show you some of the power of data and just data analysis. So what we're going to do is we're going to basically get around having to read your English assignment in high school, right? So you're assigned a textbook or you're assigned a novel to read, in this case, Little Women, and maybe you don't have time for that. You just want to answer the questions in the book report without actually reading the novel. So let's see what sort of questions we could answer. So what we have here is we have a text file, lw.txt, in this directory, which contains the entire contents of Little Women. So I'm going to read that in here. And don't worry too much about this code. Okay, so I have already made my first mistake of the quarter. The data is in a subdirectory. Okay, so we have the entire contents of the book. And so I can print this out to the screen, and you can see this is the entire contents of the novel. The Jupyter Notebook is going to display it. You can scroll down. You can read the whole book this way, although it wouldn't be very fun. But there it is. Okay, so let's see. We could just see the first 3,000 characters, and maybe that's a little bit more easier to digest. So we can see here this is from Project Gutenberg, which collects a bunch of free ebooks. Now, we see all these special characters in here, \n, and you might know that this means new line. So there's a bunch of formatting in here, right? There's spacing, there's new lines. We can tell Python to print this nicely. And now we see some nice formatting. And now we might be able to read the book like this. Okay, so what kind of analysis might we want to do with data like this? So maybe our book report asks us to analyze the plight of a character over the book, or maybe just to figure out who the main character of the book is. So how do we do that? Well, we could go through and find how many times every character is named, or maybe how many times every character is named per chapter. So let's start by just splitting this book into chapters. Okay, now how are we going to do that? We can look through here. We can see that each chapter is identified by a phrase like this. It says chapter 1 in all capitals. So let's look for phrases like this, chapter, and let's split the text based on that. So writing some code here, I will split based on the string chapter. When I do that, what I get back is a list, what's called a Python list, of the chapters. So it may not look like anything has happened here, but you can notice there are these square brackets out in front. It's telling us we have chapters. I can access the first chapter, the 0th chapter. That'll be just like the introduction of the book, the formatter. Then the actual first chapter, then the second chapter, and so forth. So let's do some analysis with this. The first thing I'm going to do is create what's called a data frame. So a data frame is a way of working with a data set, tabular data in Python. You can think of, if you think of maybe the most popular data analysis tool in the world, you might think of Python, but I'd argue that it's probably Microsoft Excel. And Microsoft Excel is working with spreadsheets, right? It's tabular data. It's data in the form of a table. Pandas is spreadsheets for Python. Okay, so we're going to work with tabular data in a different interface, and the interface will be called a data frame. So don't worry too much about this just yet. I'm going to we'll talk about data frames here in the coming lectures, but I'll just show you what we can do with them. So let's create a data frame. I'm going to create a data frame with just a single column here, and it'll be called chapters. Okay, and so this is our tabular data. We have 48 rows, 1 row for each chapter, and then 1 column. The column, or each cell contains the entire text of a column. Imagine doing that with Excel, right? Reading a book in and splitting it based on chapter. It'd be pretty difficult. It's probably doable, but be pretty difficult. Okay, so we said, let's take a look at the trajectory of characters throughout the book. So what we can do here is run some Python code which counts how many times each main character is mentioned in each chapter. So our main characters here are Amy, Beth, Joe, Meg, and Laurie. How many times was each character mentioned in each chapter? This little bit of code produces this table. It says, well, chapter 0, that was that introduction, that front matter. But in chapter 1, Amy's mentioned 23 times, Beth 26. In chapter 2, Amy's mentioned 13 times, Beth is mentioned 12, and so forth. And then we can even calculate the cumulative number of times each name appears. So running this code here and plotting, this is the trajectory of each character throughout the book. We can see that by chapter 20, Joe has been mentioned 600 times. By chapter 30, Joe has been mentioned 1,000 times, and so forth. So we can use this to sort of answer our book report questions without actually having to read the book. Let's see how. Okay, so here's our first book report question. It says, in chapter 27, Joe moves to New York alone. Her relationship with which sister suffers the most from this faraway move? So the first thing we can point out here is Joe is the main character of this book. How do we know that? Well, if I look at this plot, who's mentioned the most? It's Joe, right? So I know that Joe is the main character of the book. That isn't what the question's asking for, but it's an interesting thing to note. The question's saying Joe moves to New York and her relationship suffers with one of the other characters. Now, she moves to New York in chapter 27, so that is right about here. So if I look at chapter 27, okay, which character do you think has their relationship suffer? You can pause the video here for a second and think about it. But if you take a look, I'm going to say it's probably Meg, because Meg is not really mentioned from here on out. She's mentioned a little bit right here, but the line being flat here means that she's not being mentioned anymore. Remember, because this is a cumulative plot, cumulative number of times each name appears. So because this is flat, Meg is not really being mentioned. Because Joe is the main character, you can assume that the book is following Joe, and so this character not being mentioned means that her relationship probably suffered with the main character. Okay, so that's kind of cool. We can answer a question like that. What about this? Laurie is a man who marries one of the sisters at the end. Which sister? I'll let you think about it for a second. But if you look at the plot, you'll notice that right here, you've got something interesting going on. Okay, so these lines are in lockstep. This is Amy, the blue line, and the purplish line is Laurie. Okay, so these two characters, their lines are in lockstep. As one increases, the other one increases. And what does that mean? That means that any time that one is mentioned, the other is mentioned as well. They're mentioned in the same paragraphs, for instance. So if that's not marriage, I don't know what is. I mean, this is marriage in the view of data science, I guess. So we're going to say that Laurie marries Amy. It's interesting here that you can answer some relatively, non-trivial questions like this just by doing some exploratory data analysis. You don't have to read the book. So we said that you could get access to this Jupyter Notebook on dsc10.com. So let's go back there and take a look at the website and a little bit about this, a little bit around the syllabus.